Let's look at the 2018 solutions. Question 1.1, write code to set the properties of panel as follows. The background color to line, font color to red, font size to 20, and a particular caption. The property that needed to be used is the color property, set to line, using CL line. Font.color should be set to CL red. The font size should be set to 20, and the caption is Information Technology Paper 1. The line property was meant to be background, and when you use the dot color, that changes the background. Let's look at 1.2. In 1.2, you had to calculate the volume of a container. And the volume is equal to pi times radius squared times the height of the cylinder. Now, if you look at the diagram that's given, you have a particular radius and you're given a particular height. But all cans are filled with liquid, leaving a space of 1 millimeter on the top. So when you're filling the liquid, it'll always be 1 centimeter less than the height of the container. Let's look at the solution. So we input the height and the radius. We calculate the volume using pi. Pi is a predefined constant. So this is a constant that we can use, and there's no need to declare it anywhere. Delphi understands the use of pi. We then take the radius, we use the function SQR to square it. Alternatively, you could have went radius times radius, but this is important. In the height, you needed to subtract 1. As I indicated, the question states that there's a space of 1 centimeter that's not filled with liquid. So that needs to be removed from the height, and then the volume is output to 2 decimal places. We use the float to string F and 5 characters with 2 decimal places. The next question, 1.3. In this question, you have to generate a random number in the range 5 to 50, inclusive of 50. And then you have to determine and display the factors of the number that's generated and determine if the number generated is a prime number. So this deals with factors and with prime numbers. So let's generate a number in the range 5 to 50. You can use random range. If you're using random range, make sure to import in your users the math class. And the starting point is at 5 and the end point is 50. We need to be 1 more than the end point. Therefore, we specify 51. So once we get the random number, we then want to find the factors of that particular number. So we're going to look at all the numbers starting from 1, going all the way up to whatever the number is. We're going to check each number and check if the number is a multiple of the number. And if it's a multiple, then it will be a factor. So for I from 1 to num, if num mod I equals 0, this means when I is 1, I divide 1 by the number. And if the remainder, mod gives you remainder, if the remainder equals 1, that means it's divisible by the number, hence it is a factor. And if it's a factor, I've got an accumulator that increments by 1, count starts off at 0, and I display the factor, which is what is required. The factor is displayed, and a counter is counting the number of factors that are found. Once the loop ends, you then check to see if your counter found 2 factors. If there were only two factors, then it means that the number is a prime number, since a prime number has only two factors. Moving on to 1.4. In 1.4, a robot must receive a line of instructions to move out of a maze using no more than 10 steps forward in total. The robot reacts to the characters S, R, and L, which represents the following commands. So S is your step. Remember, you want no more than 10 steps, a maximum of 10 steps. It could be a minimum. It could have less than 10 steps, but no more than 10. R is a turn right, L is a turn left. So here, decode the line of instructions in short descriptive commands indicating the movement of the robot. As soon as the number of forward steps exceeds the value of 10, the message number of forward steps exceeds 10. So we need to decode a set of instructions that are given, and every time we find an S, it should say step forward. We need to count it because we don't want more than 10 forwards. We ignore the L. There's no count added when there's a left turn. Neither is there a count when there is a right turn. We only count every time there's a step forward. And once I reach 10 steps, I need to ensure that I don't have an 11th step since the robot cannot exceed 10 steps. Let's look at the solution. So in this case, we look at inputting the value that would have been done. There's a piece of code that's missing here. So the command line, that is the code that has been input, and that would have been done just before it is being displayed in this rich edit. So let's work on the assumption that the input for the command line is taking place here. We get the length of the command line. The reason I want the length is so that I can run a for loop from 1 to the length. Immediately you may be thinking, but what if the length is more than 10? So if the length is more than 10, I'm going to be checking to see that my forward steps do not exceed 10. And the minute it starts to exceed 10, I'm going to use an exit command to exit out of the loop and to terminate the loop. So as much as you may think that you should be using a while loop, and yes, it could be conditional, I'm going to write the solution using a for loop as I think it would be easier to understand in this way. So I've got the length of the command line. I run a loop from 1 to the length. I then start checking each of the commands. I treat it like an array. I check the first position. Each time I find an S, I increment my counter. Remember, we don't want to exceed 10. I increment my counter, and that counter started off at a 0. And immediately thereafter, I check to see if that counter has exceeded 10. The minute it exceeds 10, I display my message that it exceeds 10, and exit will terminate the loop even if the loop is incomplete. And once it exits this loop, it won't come to any of these statements below. So if the forward command is not greater than 10, it displays a message to say forward. If the command is an L, it simply says left turn. And if the command is a right, it simply displays right turn. So this process continues, and the loop executes each time. As I changes from 1, it would have gone to 2. It then looks at the second command, the second character that is in the command line, which is just a variable really. It looks at the second character, and if that's an S, it increments the forward. If not, then it just changes it to a left turn or a right turn. The key to this being here, where the forward is incremented and a check is being made to ensure that the minute the forward exceeds 10, a display takes place and the loop exits. So this question can be simplified, in my opinion, using a for loop in this way that was explained. I hope this helps.